Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night. I know we didn't learn for a little while, but okay, it's halacha and Tanya. So today in halacha, we're still in the laws of davening. So we finished the laws, generally speaking, like there's much more, but general laws about Torah reading. Now, the next part of davening that we're supposed to say is after Torah reading, we have what's called Ashri of Olatziyah. So you have Asher Yisach again, and then you have the prayer Lamnatzeach, chapter 20 of Tillim. Lamnatzeach Mizlo David Yancha Hashem B'Yem Tzara. Hashem should save us on the day of need. And then we have the prayer of Uvaladutziyim. Now, when the Talmud says, whoever says Ashri 3 times a day is guaranteed to go to Olam Haba. So we say Ashrei in the middle of right after Baruch Shamad, 2 chapters after Baruch Shamad. We say Ashrei of Olutzin at the end of, in the closer to the end of Shachris. And then we have Ashrei at Mincha time. Now, if you know Shabbos morning, interestingly, we don't say Uvalutzian on Shabbos morning. We say it Shabbos afternoon at Mincha. So halacha says, why do we say every day of the week, 6 days a week, we say Ashrei V'Alatzion by Shachris, but by not by Mincha. By Mincha we just say Ashrei, but Shabbos we don't say V'Alatzion at Shachris, only at Mincha. And the halachic reason for that is because the Chachamim said davening is long enough; they didn't want to make it any longer, so therefore they pushed off saying V'Alatzion until Mincha time. Therefore, Shabbos afternoon at Mincha, we say Ashrei V'Alatzion, and not we don't say V'Alatzion at Shachris. Now, Ashrei again is a very important tefillah, especially when somebody says Pesach es Yodecha u'Maspia Locho Chayrotze. We spoke about this when we learned about the first Ashrei. You have to say, you have to have kavanah when you say the words. If you don't have kavanah by that pasuk, you have to say it again. Now, what does the pasuk mean? Simply, we're telling Hashem, Pesach es Yedecha, open up your hand, which simply means and sustain all the needs of the living people. The needs, the rotzin, the will, and the needs of all living people. So even this Ashrei, you're supposed to have in mind what the words mean. And the custom is that when you say Pesach has Yodecha, you touch the hand tefillin, the men at least. Umasbia L'chol Chayrotzin, we touch the head tefillin. So Pesach has Yodecha, you touch the hand if you're wearing tefillin. Your hand tefillin, and then Masbia L'chol Chayrotzin, we touch the head tefillin and we kiss them. Now this tefillah of Lamnatzeach Mizmor David, which is a very important tefillah. Whenever we say Tillim for somebody who's sick, we always say chapter 20, because it's a general paragraph of Tillim that we're saying at Hashem, Yancha Hashem Yem Tzara, please answer us in the day of need. And we come with the name of Hashem, they come with horses and chariots and everything, we come with the name of Hashem. So it's a very, very important tefillah. But Chabad custom is that any day that we don't say Tachnun, we don't say Lamnatzeach Mizmor David. We don't say it that day. Shabbos, we don't say it. Rosh Chodesh, we don't say it. If there's a bris milah, chosim, whatever it is, anytime we don't say Tachnun, we don't say that chapter during davening. Before we say the daily Tehillim, the way Chitas is divided the Tillim into 30 days. So then before we say the day of Tillim, we say chapter 20, because we didn't say it before, but not as asking mercy, just asking it, as a request, prayers for Hashem. So a day of when there's no Tachnun, we don't say Lamnatzeach Mizmor David. Now, in a Volutzion, there's a lot of sentences, and then the translate, if you follow the meaning of the words. You have sentences, and then you actually say it in Aramaic. There's words in Hebrew, then some words, the translation of it in Aramaic. Then later on, there's a phrase in Hebrew, then a translation into Aramaic. You have that even in Oz Yoshin. Before Yishtabach, you say Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'od, Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'od, and then we say Hashem Malchusei Ko'em La'olam U'Lalmei U'Maya, which is the Aramaic, which is actually the Aramaic translation of Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'od, that Hashem should rule forever. Okay? But in halacha it says, and we saw that the Rebbe did it, even though the Arizal didn't, that anytime there's an Aramaic prayer, a verse, that verse you say quietly. Like even in Oz Yosher, when you heard the Rebbe davening, he would say Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'od, Hashem Yimlech Le'elam V'od, and then quietly he said the Aramaic verse, Hashem Malchusei Kol La'olam U'Lalmei U'Maya. And then in the volatility, whenever there was an Aramaic translation of a Hebrew verse, it's brought down in halacha to say it quietly. It could be the reason is not to give it the same credence as the actual Hebrew one. Okay, next is a very important tefillah, Aleinu L'Shabach. I believe you mentioned that in the past. Aleinu L'Shabach is the end of davening. It's a very important tefillah. People I know run out of shul when they're saying it, which B'chal, generally speaking, according to halacha, you're not allowed to run out of shul. You have to walk out of shul slowly. You have to run to shul. Running leaving shul, you're supposed to go slow. The opposite of what people do. People go slowly to shul, come late, and they run out of shul early. But that you're not allowed to do. You're supposed to show that shul is not davening, is not a burden, it's an enjoyable thing. You're supposed to leave shul slowly. But Aleinu L'Shabach is a very important tefillah. It was we mentioned this. It was instituted by the Yeshua ben Nun when they conquered the city of Jericho, which was on Shabbos, the Rambam says. When they conquered the city of Jericho, Yeshua ben Nun, Moshe Rabbeinu's disciple, took over after Moshe Rabbeinu, instituted the prayer of Aleinu L'Shabach L'Adeinu. Okay. You're not allowed to run out of shul. You have to go slowly out of shul. But if you're running from shul to another place to go learn, then you're allowed to run. Because then again, you're going to another mitzvah. But just to leave shul, to go home or to go wherever, you should walk out of shul slowly. Now, another interesting thing in halacha over here is about Kaddish. People say Kaddish. It's worthwhile to take a little while to discuss this whole concept of Kaddish, that a mourner's Kaddish. Now, just to mention, generally speaking, there's different types of Kaddish. You have half Kaddish, like right after Yishtabach, before Baruch Hu, the Chazan says half Kaddish. By Mincha, after Ashri, before Shemon Esrei, you say half Kaddish. After Tachnun, you say half Kaddish. Before Baruch Hu, you say half Kaddish. That's one type of Kaddish. Then you have what's called Kaddish Tiskabel. That only the Chazan says, by Shachris Mincha, I have one time Tiskabel per tefillah, depending when. Like by Shachris, it said after Ashri V'Letzin. By Mincha, it said after Tachnu. By Ma'ariv, it said before Aleinu, after the quiet Shemon Esrei. That is said one Tiskabel, one Kaddish Tiskabel before per tefillah. You don't do two Tiskabels before for one tefillah. Therefore, I don't know if you noticed, like Tisha B'Av, after Shemon Esrei, they said Kaddish Tiskabel. And then after Eichon Kinnis, they said Kaddish without Tiskabel. Because the phrase Tiskabel Tzulaisen V'Husen the whole Bais Yisrael, Kodem Avuhain Divishmaya V'Imru Amen means Tiskabel, we're asking Hashem, Tiskabel you should accept Tzulaisen V'Husen the prayers and the requests, the whole Bais Yisrael of all Jews, Kodem Avuhain Divishmaya before the Heavenly Father, the V'Imru Amen. Okay, so that's only said by the chazan, one per tefillah. That's it. Then you have what's called Kaddish al Yisrael. Oh, no, this goes first. Kaddish Yosem, mourner's Kaddish. Okay, so you have half Kaddish, Kaddish Tiskabel, mourner's Kaddish, and then you have Kaddish that's called al Yisrael. Al Yisrael Vaad Rabbonim Lubavitch. Okay, now what are these different levels of Kaddish? There's really, I mean, it's not a question. The origin of Kaddish, interestingly, was the mourner's Kaddish. It said in Aramaic, because that was the language everybody spoke when Kaddish was made. Oh, it was primarily instituted, believe it or not, for little kids that needed to say Kaddish for a parent who couldn't daven for the Amid, they couldn't be the Chazan, so they instituted Kaddish for them. But there are different levels of Kaddish. Half Kaddish, generally speaking, is to separate between one part of davening to the next. You want to separate between Sukkah de Zimra up to Yishtabach, and after Yishtabach, you say half Kaddish. You want to separate between Tachnun and Ashrei V'Letzion, you have half Kaddish. After Torah reading, half Kaddish. Half Kaddish, generally speaking, before Baruch Hu half Kaddish, generally speaking, half Kaddish, that the Chazan says only when there's a minyan, is primarily used as a separation between one part of davening and the next. That's the primary concept of half Kaddish. Now then you have mourner's Kaddish. Mourner's Kaddish, a person says if, God forbid, they are saying Kaddish for a relative, parent, father, mother, or other relatives, or people say it for other people. Kaddish Yosem is only allowed to be said by people that don't have parents. Now, even, let's say somebody has one parent passed away, so they say Kaddish, we'll discuss the Kaddish for the 11 months soon. You say Kaddish. But generally speaking, it's brought down in halacha. If you want to say a mourner's Kaddish for somebody else, you have to get permission from the living parent. If you have no parents alive, so then you can say Kaddish whenever you want. But if you have two parents alive, you're not allowed to say mourner's Kaddish unless if they distinctly give you permission. I'll give you an example. Somebody loses a grandfather and the parents are not religious, but the grandchild is religious. And the grandparents are not going to go to shul to say Kaddish, okay? So they're asking their grandson, who has two parents, to say Kaddish for the grandfather, grandmother, whatever. So then the din is, if they give you permission, then you're allowed to say the mourner's Kaddish. If not, if they don't give you, it means not, they have to give you permission in order to say it. If you don't have their permission, you're not allowed to say it. Halacha says even more, that even if one parent's alive and the other parent isn't, if you want to say Kaddish Yosem for somebody else, you really should ask, you have to ask permission from the living parent that you could say Kaddish. Many times they will, many times they might not. So, you have to ask permission from them to say Kaddish. Now, when is mourner's Kaddish said? So it's said after the Yom, after Aleinu, after Tilim, after different types of davening, different parts of davening, is when the mourner's Kaddish is said. The Kaddish that we call Al Yisrael, Vaad Rabbonim Lubavitch, that is said when the oral Torah is learned, not written Torah. When you say Tilim, after Tilim, if you notice in davening, they say Kaddish. What Kaddish do they say after Tilim, which is written Torah? They say Kaddish Yosem, the mourner's Kaddish. After oral Torah learning, like they finish a tractate of Gemara, or before davening begins, before Haidul, they say the Kaddish al Yisrael, called Kaddish Rabbonim. Why is it called Kaddish? Because right before that, You said the Mishnayos of Ezel Mekayman, which is chapter Mishnayos in the Tractate Zvachim. And then you say Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, which is a Braisa, which again, oral Torah. So when you say that, then you say Kaddish al Yisrael. Now, according to halacha, a person with a parent is allowed to say al Yisrael. According to halacha, if you have, even if you're a parent, just like you could be chaz and say Kaddish Tiskabel, and you could say half Kaddish. The only Kaddish somebody cannot say if they have parents is the mourner's Kaddish. It's called Yehei Shlama. They don't say Tiskabel, they don't say Al Yisrael Rabbanon. They say Yehei Shlama Rabbam at the end of the Kaddish. But Kaddish Al Yisrael, and therefore after Ein Kalokeinu, again we say Kaddish Al Yisrael. Why is Kaddish Rabbanon? Because we're quoting Brises of Peter Makteres, Amir Abelazar, Tamidei Chacham. These are all Gemaras or all old Torah. Then after Tilim, we'd say a Mishnayos Kaddish. You add another Mishnayos Kaddish in Chabad. And I'll explain why in a second. So Mishnayos Kaddish, again, it's Mishnayos, it's oral Torah. So then the mourner says, Al Yisrael v'Rabbanim Talmidei. He's got to be, but Al Yisrael v'Rabbanim Talmidei. So the rule is, if it's oral Torah, you say Al Yisrael. If it's written Torah, you say Yehei Shlama Rabbah. Now, saying Kaddish for a deceased parent is very, very important. It's respect to the parent, and it also protects them from punishment of Gehenna, of hell. A child saying Kaddish protects the parents, or whoever they're saying Kaddish for, especially parents. It saves them from Gehenna. Now, if you notice, a mourner is general, Jewish knowledge. Is it called Yediyah Kloli? But it's very important to know this. We say Kaddish for a parent for 11 months. Why not 12 months? Because one of the main purposes of Kaddish the first year is to save the parent from punishment in Gehenna. Now, the Gemara says, wicked people burn in Gehenna, in hell, 12 months. That's what the Gemara, the max. I mean, there are a few exceptions. The maximum that a person burns in Gehenna is 12 months. So we don't want to say Kaddish for 12 months. Basically, we're saying, hey, parent, you were in Russia, and I need to say Kaddish to protect you from hell for 12 months. It's disrespectful. So we stop after 11 months. By Sfadim, they stop for a week and then start again. We stop the whole 11. Ashkenazic circle stop the whole 11th month. The 12th month, we don't say Kaddish. Okay, now, it says in Zohar, if you ever notice, Chabad is very particular, if they're able to daven for the Amid to be the Chazan, and, we say that's the Mishnayos Kaddish. We're very meticulous about this. And the Rebbe brings down a Zohar. The Rebbe Rashab writes, and the Rebbe brings this down, a mourner tries to say 16 Kadeshim a day. That includes half Kaddish, whole Kaddish, Tiskabel, Al Yisrael. We try to say 16 Kadeshim a day. Why? So he says an interesting thing. It says in the Zohar that Kaddish protects the person in hell for 1.5 hours. This is what it says in the Zohar. That Kaddish protects the person for 1.5 hours. So if you have 16 Kadeshim a day, 16 times 1.5 is 24. So by saying 16 Kadeshim a day, you accept Shabbos. Shabbos, we don't have that many Kadeshim, because an Oval doesn't daven in the morning, doesn't daven for the Yomid. But Shabbos Gehenna is closed anyway. So the purpose of Kaddish is basically to save the parent or the person from punishment in Gehenna. We say 16 Kadeshim a day. because each Kaddish works for an hour and a half. So 16 times 1.5 is 24. That's why we say 16 Kaddishim a day. In order to say Kaddish, you must have a minyan. No minyan, no Kaddish. Even by a funeral, if there's no 10 men Jews, no 10 male Jews at a funeral, you cannot say Kaddish. You're not allowed to say Kaddish. It's a sin saying Kaddish. In order to say Kaddish, you must have a minyan of Jews. Not yet. Now, I will admit to Shem talk about when you stand by Kaddish, when you can sit by Kaddish. We'll get to that, probably not today. So anyway, so Kaddish is, so now there's an interesting question. Why do we say Kaddish in a yard site? Person's passed away 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. Why are we saying Kaddish? They're not in Gehenna anymore. Or you can have a different thing. A tzaddik passes away. The children say Kaddish for a year anyway. Now, they're definitely not in Gehenna. Why are we saying Kaddish in a yard site? So it's very interesting to explain this a little bit. Is a concept people should know. There's something called mikvah. Go to mikvah. Mikvah does two things. If you're impure, it makes you pure. Right? Mikvah, the Torah says, makes you pure. But the Kohen Gadol went 5 times on Yom Kippur to the mikvah. 5 times. Trust me, he didn't become tamei. He didn't become impure 5 times in Yom Kippur. There's 2 aspects of a mikvah. One aspect of a mikvah is to remove impurity. And the second aspect of mikvah is to add kedusha, add holiness. That's why men go to mikvah, even if they're not tamei. Why? Because it adds kedusha. It's mikvah's purification. It adds kedusha in addition to removal of tumah. The same thing, Kaddish does 2 things. Kaddish removes, like we said before, the punishment in Gehenna. But Kaddish also helps the neshama going up in Gan Eden. In other words, on a day of a yard site, the neshama always goes up in Gan Eden, but it's a gradual ascent. On the day of a yard site, the neshama jumps higher in Gan Eden. So therefore it says that on a yard site, what does Kaddish do? Kaddish is not saving the person from Gehenna because they're out of Gehenna already 30 years. But what does Kaddish do? Saying Kaddish on a yard site helps the person being elevated in Gan Eden from level to level. The push from down here helps them to go up higher. And therefore, that's why by tzaddikim, even the first year, they're definitely not in Gehenna, they're definitely in Gan Eden. But people, the relatives or whoever it is, saying Kaddish for tzaddikim actually helps them in their ascent from level to level. So this is the various different things of Kaddish. And even in Kitzur Shulchan, it brings on in the Midrashim, there's many stories told in Medrash. Many stories told in Medrash about to a child saying Kaddish for the father or mother. It does tremendous things, for the sake of the parent. Then you have it. This is not that relevant now. Like, see, today is different. Years ago, only one person said the mourner's Kaddish. Then the question, well, who says it? A yard site, shloshim, year. I mean, there's a whole controversy in Allah. In today's world, everybody says Kaddish together. So it's not one person, saying the Kaddish. So then there's no issue who comes first. But there are by the way, in halacha precedences, let's say if there's 2 people that want to daven for the Yom Chazan, and they're both mourners, there's a lot of halacha who comes before whom. Like somebody in the middle of Shiva has first priority. Shloshim and Yartzeit are equal. Shloshim and the first 30 days. And afterwards, somebody in Shloshim comes before somebody that's not in Shloshim. Then you have a din, somebody who's a member of a shul, has precedence over somebody who's a non-member of a shul. There's a lot of laws with this, who can daven for the Yomid, who has rights first to the Yomid and to Kaddish and all those interesting things. So that is generally the story with the various different levels of Kaddish. Now, what happens, I'm just going off a minute, because there's a few minutes left for halacha. What happens if somebody had to say Kaddish once, a very Chabad person, but he was teaching in a Hebrew school. Now, years ago, they had a Hebrew school. Right after public school, the kids went straight from public school. Those of you might remember, they would go to the shul, to wherever it was, and to go to classes in Hebrew school. And during the winter, Mincha Ma'ariv time was the time when the teachers were teaching in Hebrew school. And I know many times, there are many, not one person, many answers from the Rebbe, the teachers had a dilemma. They lost a parent. They had to say Kaddish, but they were in the middle of teaching Jewish kids Torah. Public school kids are teaching them Torah about Yiddishkeit. And they asked the Rebbe, what should they do? And generally, to generalize what the Rebbe answered basically, who said that teaching children Torah is any less important than saying Kaddish? And the Rebbe told them they should not stop teaching, they should continue teaching, and they should hire somebody else to say Kaddish for that Mincha Ma'ariv. It was very interesting. The Rebbe said Kaddish is beneficial for the neshama. The Rebbe said, who says that teaching Yiddish to children Torah is any less important than saying Kaddish for a parent? So, I mean, you see that the importance of both of Kaddish and teaching, and it says the main thing also is not the saying the Kaddish as much as living up, doing mitzvahs in their merit, and, like it says, even though Kaddish is very important, that's not the main thing. The main thing, you want to honor your parents. After they pass away, you should follow in the footsteps of Torah and mitzvahs. That's how the Zohar says you do merits for the parents, is by keeping Torah and mitzvahs in their merit. And like it says, Ben Yechavidov, the Gemara says, the whole thing over in Kitzur, even Kitzur Shnocha brings down that a person, saying Kaddish for a parent is more important than saying Kaddish for a tzaddik, because it's a halachic obligation to say for a parent. It's not a halachic obligation to say for a tzaddik. Tzaddik you could say if you want to say, but the actual obligation is to say for a parent. In fact, there's a whole discussion, it's not for now. What happens if a parent tells a child, I don't want you to say Kaddish for me? A big discussion in halacha. A lot of weird cases that people had things. A father, and now that there are cases, halacha brings on, again, I'm not going to rule on them because they're very complicated. But there were cases the father had 5 kids, and he says to one of the kids, I want everybody to say Kaddish, but not you. Is the child obligated to listen to the parent or not? Or if a parent says, I don't want you to say Kaddish for me, is the child, in other words, is it an obligation of the child, or it's respect for the parent? If it's respect for the parent, the parent says, I don't want you to do it, then you don't do it. But if it's an obligation of the child, the parent can tell the kid, I don't want you to do it. It's the child's obligation. He has to do it. Okay, but we're going to go to Tanya and Mitzvah Shem next week. We'll continue more about the dinam of Kaddish, by the way. Do you have to stand? Are you allowed to sit? What's the story with Kaddish?